been talking about, we can go through Genesis. We've talked about Genesis 1 through 3. We've talked about Noah, Genesis 6 through 9-ish. And we're going to talk about Abraham today. Not everything about Abraham. There's too much there. Too lot. There's some Lot there too, but they parted ways. But I think you'll hear something that kind of ties together with what we've been talking about and helps towards that goal I mentioned at the beginning. If you're going to understand the New Testament, it helps to know the Old Testament. If you just read the New Testament without much Old Testament context, it's like watching the third movie of a trilogy. Like, you get what's going on, but there's a lot that you're missing, right? And to understand the Old Testament, you got to understand the Pentateuch. To understand the Pentateuch, you got to understand Genesis. So we're in Genesis right now. And last time, talking about Noah, we talked about how God ruined a kind of already ruined creation, and had this moment of where He created these conditions for a reordering and a renewal to take place, right, through Noah, and how He made this one-sided covenant with humanity. He announced it to Noah, and He says, here's what I'll do. I'm never going to destroy the earth through a flood again. You don't have to do anything. I know you're not going to change, but I'm still going to do this. And so Noah is kind of presented as this, like, a new start, right? And if you were, hopefully this isn't spoiling it for anybody, but it doesn't work out. Noah has his own failure, also involving a garden. Something shady happens in a tent, and things are just, keep going downhill from there. And we end with the Tower of Babylon, and it is the Tower of Babylon. I'm not sure why. It's probably known. I'm going to say nobody knows. I don't know how it came to be called Babel. The Hebrew word is Babel, so but that's the same word throughout the entire Old Testament whenever they're talking about Babylon. It's just that in that one passage, it's translated Babel, and everywhere else is translated Babylon. Not sure why, but I'm sure somebody knows. The point is, the Tower of Babylon is where all these people get together, and they have a new technology, bricks with straw, and they're like, all right, we're going to build this tower that goes up to heaven. And they want to elevate themselves to God's position. That's what's going on. To us, we'd be like, hey, what's wrong with building a skyscraper? But in that culture, the meaning of what they're doing is wanting to ascend up into the heavens, right? That's God's space, and they want to go up there and elevate themselves. And so God decides that's no good. And He confuses their languages, and they all get scattered from there. And in that time, or from that place, is where God chooses one person to start working through. We get this genealogy at the end of in chapter 11 of Genesis that ends with Abraham's father, his Terah, and his family moving away from Ur of the Chaldeans. That's Babylon. So out of this thing that's going on in the earlier part of chapter 11 with the Tower of Babel, people are scattered. One of those guys is Terah, and that's Abraham's dad. And so Abraham and his brothers, they all go move north, and then God, just for some reason, picks this one guy. He's been dealing with humanity on a whole, and he decides, I'm going to go down to one guy, and then you'll see that he builds it back up eventually, right? It goes to Moses, it goes to a people, a whole family, but He starts with this one guy. So let's start there. This is, if you ever want like key verses to understand the story or to talk about the story of the Old Testament, this is a big one. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And it says that Yahweh called Abram. This is before he was named Abraham. God changed his name later. And he called Abram and he told him to leave the land that he was in and to leave his relatives and to go to where he'd tell him to go. And then he gives us this promise. He says, I'll make you a great nation and I'll bless you. I'll make your name great and you'll be a blessing. Are we hearing some repeated words here? And I will bless those who bless you, and those who curse you I will curse. And this is the very important sentence. And all families of the earth will be blessed in you. All the families, this is like a word for, clans or tribes or whatever, not just, mom, dad, and kids. All families of the earth will be blessed through you. This is something that the apostles recognized later when they're trying to get everybody to realize that Jesus, Messiah, came for everyone and that everyone now is in the family. This is God saying, I want to start with you, but eventually everybody is going to get a chance to receive this blessing through you. Just a remarkable statement. And so Abraham, he went out, and the very next sentence is in verse 4 is that Abram went out as Yahweh had told him, and Lot went with him. So, did he obey God? Kinda. He did go out, but he was supposed to leave his relatives, but he took a lot with him instead. And that really illustrates in a sentence Abraham's life and our lives. We're a mixed bag. He was a mixed bag. Sometimes really great, awesome things, obeying the Lord in times where you're crazy. Like, how could you believe that? And yet you still did it, and God came through. And other times, the simplest instructions aren't followed. He's us. He's not any worse off than any of us are. But as we'll see, God doesn't have a problem working through people that are like that. So I want to jump ahead to chapter 15, and this is right after this. There are these 5 kings that rebelled, that had rebelled against these other 4 kings. And so these 4 kings defeat these 5 kings, and they capture Lot. And then Abram goes, just him and his household guys, like him and people in his kind of group, like 300 of them. And he goes up against 4 kings that just defeated 5 kings, and he rescues everybody. Pretty amazing. And he has this whole deal with Melchizedek. We're going to go a lot into Melchizedek when it comes to doing Hebrews. So I'm not going to talk a lot about it now. But he meets Melchizedek. Melchizedek blesses him, and then right after that, there's this contrast where Melchizedek is just wanting to, bless him, and Abraham gives Melchizedek a tenth, and then the king of Sodom, who's one of the kings that was getting his stuff back because Abraham went and defeated those guys. So now all the stuff that they took away from the king of Sodom, he's getting it back, and he says, "Hey, I want to give it to you, Abram." And Abraham says, "No, I don't want it to be said that you made me rich. I'm going to trust in God. The only thing I'll take is whatever my men have eaten." And so there's this contrast between Melchizedek and the king of Sodom, and so right after that is what this is, right? After all these things, what things? This whole battle and everything, where Abram had refused this compensation. He didn't want to be in debt. He didn't want to owe him anything, and he didn't want it to be said that this person had made him rich. And so then God says, don't be afraid. He just went up against like a whole bunch of kings and probably, upset some people. So God says, don't be afraid. I'm your shield. Your reward shall be very great. He just turned down a reward. God says you're going to be getting a great reward. And so Abram's like, great for the reward, but like I'm kind of bummed because I don't have any kids. Like, who's it going to go to, right? Like, that's nice, but like, who am I going to leave this to? In a culture where that was like what, even today, today maybe there's like, oh, you can get, give something to a charitable organization, have that. But most of the time, most of us want to, especially if whatever you have, whether it's a little or a lot, you want to be able to leave it to somebody that is in your family or that you're really close to, right? And especially in that time, that's what Abram wants. And so he's kind of bummed about that, but he says, look, I don't even have any kids, right? The guy that's going to be my inheritor is like one of one of the foremen of the house, like one of the chief servants is going to be in getting all this, everything that I have. And so then God goes on and he says, no, that guy, he's not going to get all your stuff. So your own son from your own body is going to be your heir. And he takes him outside, the famous scene. He looks up at the stars and he says, if you can count that, good luck. But if you can, that's how many your descendants are going to be. And the famous line that Abram believed the Lord, believed in Yahweh, and the Lord, reckoned it to him, Abram, as righteousness. Reckoned it to him, meaning like he chalked it off as righteousness. Right? Abram trusted and believed, and God wrote down, oh, he's righteous. That's how God interpreted or saw that. And you need to know that in the Old Testament, if you do a word study of the word righteousness, tzedakah, it has chiefly to do with relationships, doing right by others in relationships. It could be God, it could be other people, right? But when you're righteous, you're in a right relationship. And so what this is saying is that to be in a right relationship with God, we have to trust him. To be in a right relationship with God, we have to trust him. Why is that so important? What's the thing we didn't do in the garden? We didn't trust him. We did wrong by God there because he's completely trustworthy. That's the wrong relational thing to do. The right relational thing to do would have been to trust him. And so to be in a right relationship with God, that's the foundation. You got to start there. You got to start by trusting him. And man, this is like one of two, maybe really of the two highest points in Abram's life. Maybe there's more than that, but the ones that I would say like were the top two. There's a few that maybe a close third or fourth. This is right up there. He's been having this dialogue with God. He's old. He's too old to have kids, like way past I mean, he's older than dirt, even for back then. And he's like, he can't have, but God says, your offspring is gonna be really large. And Abraham just said, okay, I trust you. The word for believe there is emet. It's where we get the word amen. He amened what God said. And so there we are. Abram believes God about this promise, but he does ask this question at the end. Verse 8 there, he says, how shall I know that I'll possess the land? Because God also tells him he's going to possess this land that he's dwelling in, the area of Canaan. And so Abram's like, well, he does ask for like some kind of a sign or assurance or something like that. Like he says, how do I know, right? I think it's come from what we see here. It's coming from a place of like, I believe you, but like, how do I know? Kind of like what Mary was saying, like, okay, but how's this going to happen? You know, when she was told that she was going to be pregnant. And God meets him where he's at. The very next line is, take a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, and a 3-year-old ram, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Which is kind of a really like a non sequitur left turn. Like, how is that supposed to answer Abram's question? But Abram was actually, because God was meeting him where he was at. Abram knew exactly what he was talking about. For us, it's really a left turn because we're not from that culture. And what it was is covenants. So first, I want to tell you just a little bit about the culture that he was in, and that's kind of a long quote there. You can read it on your own, but I'll just summarize it for you. Right? They lived in a patriarchal society, which means that there's like a man who's married and is like kind of the head of the household, right? And the household in Hebrew is the Beit Av. That's there on the slide, Beit Av. So in that culture, everything is related through the family unit. The household is at the center, right? It's all your closest relatives, your parents, your kids, or your brothers and sisters. And then there's like the clan, which is the next layer out of people that maybe you have the same great-grandfather or something like that. And then the tribe goes even further out, which maybe you all have the same great-grandfather, right? And so your closest obligations and privileges and responsibilities are to the people that you're closest to. And as the circles go out, you have less responsibility or privilege with them, right? It's all centered on the family unit. In our society, the family is important, but the government is the one that provides us this environment for being able to work and earn a wage and economies and all that. But back then, all that was through the family, and so the head of the household had all this responsibility for everybody in the household to take care of anybody that was hurt or that was didn't have somebody else to take care of them. Women, because it was a kind of this patriarchal male society, women related through their father and later their husband or right, and so yeah, that was the culture. And that's why that's why we may think it strange today that that all the inheritance or most of it would go to the oldest male child, whereas today we usually split things, right, evenly amongst kids. Most people do that. But all the responsibility of being the next guy in the generations is going to take care of everybody. Right, like your spinster aunt or whatever, like everybody that's still there, that responsibility goes to that son. So it's only fair that he gets more resources to carry that out, right? That's not how our society is, but that's how their society was. And so there you go. Now, here's the problem in a society where everything is through family ties, right? Related by blood. How do you establish ties with somebody that's not a family ties with somebody that's not your family? The solution? A covenant. That's how you did it. That's how you established this close bond of responsibility and privilege with somebody that wasn't your family. And it's very common in the ancient Near East. We have examples about, it's not just in the Bible. We have examples, and in fact, there was like a really standard like format of some kinds of covenants. They didn't all have to follow these formats, but there was a standard, And the most common types of covenants were between like a stronger party and a weaker party, like maybe a king and somebody else who's like only a chieftain or whatever, Like so that was the most common between somebody has better position or strength and someone who has less, right? That was the most common kind. And it involved the sacrifice of animals to kind of like seal the ceremony, which is what God is signaling to Abram by saying, "Hey, give me some animals," as he's saying, "Okay, we're gonna do this covenant." And in fact, a way of saying making a covenant was they would say, "We're going to cut a covenant," because what they would do is they'd take the animals and cut them in half and lay them the two halves, and then part of the ceremony is that the two parties would walk down the middle of these animals that were cut in half. And what they're signaling or signifying is that may it be done to me as it has been done to these animals if I fail to keep my end of this partnership. Right? A covenant is a partnership. You have things you're going to do. I have things I'm going to do. There's consequences if you mess up. There's consequences if I mess up. There's rewards if you, right? All that. And the ceremony, just to add that note of seriousness to it. And this isn't just in the Bible. It's common in the ancient Near East. And you see it elsewhere in the Bible, not just here. Not just when I mean by see it elsewhere is there's lots of mentions of covenants, but there's also even mentions of animals being sacrificed as a part of the covenant, all that. So that's the deal. You walk down the two parties, the one a little stronger, one a little weaker, would walk down the middle of these animals, and they're saying, if I fail to keep my end of the bargain up, then may it be done to me as to these animals. And so let me show you just a couple things on the formula. This is a really common format from the Hittites, and this document would have it would have a preamble in which usually the stronger party, the names and titles would be listed, and there'd be what they call the scholars call this historical prologue. I'm going somewhere with this, so just stick with me. But this will help you understand what the culture is, right? So, historical prologue where they're talking about, okay, here's why you should enter into this covenant, right? And then the stipulations are what you're going to do, what you're required to do, blessings and curses, or if you do and don't, like what happens, right? And then of course witnesses. Witnesses, very important, and common to call as witnesses the deities of the two parties involved, whatever gods they worshipped, but also anything else, the sky, the clouds, the land, whatever, right? All these witnesses, because they want it to be really airtight, no loopholes. And then the last couple details is that very common that a copy of this covenant document would be placed in the temple of the deities that were called, as witnesses, and that the weaker party was required to periodically, once a year, once a month, whatever, periodically, to read it, sometimes to himself or maybe to his people or whatever, right? This is all common. And so maybe that helps make sense of like the covenant at Sinai, for example. This is in Exodus 20, starting at verse 2. I'm Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of slaves. And then he goes into the Ten Commandments. That's the format. And in the Pentateuch, the other things are included too, right? And especially in Deuteronomy, where Moses is like recounting and recapping the law and the covenant to the new generation. He goes into the blessings that that happen if they follow, right? The curses. They talk about, so why was the ark, why was the tablets of the testimony put into the ark, right? It was put into the temple of the deity involved, in this case, the tabernacle. And the king was required, said, you got to read this, right? That was one of the things that Moses says, one day you guys are going to want a king, and here's some of the things he should do, right? So that's all in there. This isn't a sermon about the Mosaic covenant or anything, but I just want to give you a little background. So where Abram hears this, okay, bring me some animals, so they cut this covenant, and it goes on to talk about how Abram lays these animals out, and of course he's doing a covenant with God. So where's God, right? So Abraham is there waiting for the other side, the other party to show up, and he's chasing birds and stuff away from the animals, because there's these dead animals, all these vultures or whatever start going, and then this deep sleep falls on Abraham. The same word that was used of Adam. When this word is used in the Bible, something major is about to go down. It's the same word that when Adam was put to sleep and God took one of his sides to make Eve. So Abram goes into this deep sleep, and there's this darkness, and God's talking to him about what's going to happen in the future to his family. And then this pot, this piece of pottery with fire in it, it's floating, shows up. Abram's still passed out, kind of in a stupor, a Holy Spirit stupor. This pot passes between the animals. So what's common is that, in particular, the weaker party had to pass through the animals, because they're the ones that are responsible and they're going to get the brunt. So often both would. Abram didn't. God prevented him from doing that. Does it mean that Abraham didn't? Does it mean that he didn't have to do things? No, he did. Later, the whole circumcision thing come in. That's intense, right? Yeah. But the only one who passed through those animals and said, "May it be done to me as these animals, if this isn't upheld," was God. Are you with me? Whose body was torn because humanity failed to keep up their end? God takes the consequences upon himself. Didn't have to do that. Abram's there. He's ready. He's waiting. He's been waiting all day to go through this covenant with God, to pass through the two halves of the animals. But God says, no. I'll be responsible for making sure that we both get through this. It's pretty intense. So Abram has this intense experience. Covenants are between two people, and they ask deities to be witnesses, but nobody ever sees these deities actually show up. But in Abram's case, it's just him and that deity. And they showed up. Very next story. Remember I said we're all mixed bags and that Abram was a mixed bag too? Sarai, it's before her name was changed to Sarah. They haven't had any kids. God said, you're going to have a lot of kids. They haven't had any kids. And there's this Egyptian slave. And Sarai says to Abram, look, please, Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my servant. Perhaps I will have children by her. Literally it says, I will be built from her. It's the same word that is used when God built the woman out of the side of the man. Made or fashioned is in Genesis 2:22, the common translation. In the ESV, I just use that as an example. In Genesis 2:22 and once in Ezekiel are the only time out of almost 400 times that is translated made. Most of those times it's translated built. And I'm just saying that because this is a really unique kind of phrase for Sarah to say, maybe I'll be built up from her. And this is how the Old Testament works. They use repeated words and phrases to make you as hyperlinks to another part of the story. And so when you see these things, you go, oh, where else have I heard these words? Well, you can think of maybe a few, right? Well, let's keep going. Let's see if there's a few more. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. Then Sarah, the wife of Abram, took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to Abram as a wife. In the garden, Eve, who had been built from Adam, sees, we're going to get to see in a second, sees that the fruit is desirable and takes and eats it, gives it to her husband. Then later, the voice of the Lord, walking in the windy part of the day, says, where are you? And they have that confrontation. And when God is talking about the consequences, he says to Adam, because you listened to the voice of your wife, cursed be the ground. And he goes on. This is how the Old Testament works. Repeated words and phrases. You start seeing all these stack up. You're meant to okay, go back, reread Genesis 2 and 3, upload that. Okay, now back to Genesis 16. This is Abram's rebellion story, the fall story. He'd been promised that a son, that he'd have all these kids. It's not happening. They decide to do it their own way, just like Adam and Eve decided to do it their own way. And rather than listening to God, who had made these promises, he listens to another person. And she takes Hagar, their slave, gives her to Abram. Is this making sense? You guys following me? So, wrong button. All right. This time it's Hagar that sees that she'd conceived. And you guys know the story. She starts to despise Sarah. She's feeling, I could have kids, this old hag can't, and that makes me better, right? In a society where that's what they wanted. That's what they've been wanting. And so she sees that as elevating her status, and she starts to look down on her mistress. And so Sarah gets really ticked. And she says, Abrams, this is all your fault.
Saw that one coming.
Never mind that I told you to do it. It was all your fault. This is also the garden. the man and his wife playing off of each other, right? Strife. And Abram's solution is like, well, look, she's your slave. Do what is right in your eyes. That's a phrase that becomes repeated in the Bible as well. What is good in your eyes? Right? Pardon me? What's good in... I did not know that. For the recording and those listening, Ian was talking about how the word evil is related to good in your eyes, and you can look it up. I won't be able to say the words, the names of the letters that you said, so I won't repeat it. But I'm with you. So yeah, what is good in your eyes? And so that's what they did. And where does Hagar flee? To the wilderness. Also like Adam and Eve. So yeah, it's this is their one of their biggest failures. They abuse their Egyptian slave to try to fulfill God's promises in their own way. And man, a lot of issues have come down the years from that, haven't they? Man, we're still living the consequences today. But that's what they did. They decided they're going to do it their own way. Well, does God give up on them? No, of course not. Just like us, he doesn't give up on us either. Even when right after we get this amazing promise, we do something completely boneheaded against it. Eventually, God does, when Ishmael, Hagar's son, is in the 13, 14-year-old range, God says, yeah, you're gonna have, it's gonna be next year, Sarah, you're gonna have a son. So Isaac is born, and after that, things are going better. Abraham's like, all right, we're on track. And then comes the test. One day, God says, he says, yes, Abraham, this is after he changes his name, he tells him about circumcision, and he circumcises everybody, including Isaac. And then he tests Abraham, and he says, I want you to take your son, your only child Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains where I will tell you. And so he goes. He packs everything up, gets all the provisions, and he goes. You guys know the story. He's like this when God says, stop. And he says, verse 11, the angel of Yahweh called to him. He says, stop. Don't stretch out your hand against the boy. Don't do anything. For now I know that you are one who fears God, since you have not withheld your son, your only child, from me. And this ram, they look over, and there's this ram caught in a thicket, and they sacrifice it instead. And then, again, the angel of Yahweh called to Abram a second time. And he says, I swear by myself that because you have done this thing, and you have not withheld your son, your only child, that I will certainly bless you and greatly multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is by the shore of the sea. Your offspring will possess the gate of your enemies. An idiom for being victorious. And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your offspring. He's reiterating what we read in Genesis 12. Why? Because you've listened to my voice. This is his redemption moment. This test. Whereas before he listened to Sarah's voice. Whereas before he had done right what was in his own eyes and Sarah's eyes. Whereas before he tried to hold on and figure out a way to make this promise happen. Now he's gone, I'm not doing that again. And he listens to the voice of God. Did you notice any other repeated words in there, in this Genesis 22 passage? Your only child, yeah. Yeah, that's there in the beginning. Take your son, your only child, Isaac, whom you love. Again, for now I know you're one who fears God, for you have not withheld your son, your only child, from me. And then at the end, you've not withheld your son, your only child. Does that remind you of anything? Anybody? Jesus. I'll read one of them. It's at the baptism. Mark 1:11. A voice came from heaven, you are my beloved son, and you I am well pleased. It's the beloved, agapetos, is the Greek word that in the Septuagint translates in all three instances only. So, in other words, Mark and Matthew and Luke, who all have this story, the voice from heaven is quoting from their Greek scriptures. This phrase, it's a mashup quotation, which a lot of times they are. Take a piece from one verse, a piece from another. But that, the only son, the beloved son. And when if you've been, you've all been around a while around the Bible and the Word. We know that this lamb is a type of Christ and all this stuff. But this Isaac is the child of the promise, right? He's the heir of the promise. Through him, the promise comes. Just like Jesus. That's what the voice from heaven is saying. This is my beloved son, my only son. And just as Abram didn't withhold him, think Romans 8:32. I think he who did not spare his only son but gave him, how much more will he give us along with him all things? Or John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. He didn't withhold. So that's all I'm going to talk about for Abraham and Abram. He was a mixed bag. Had some terrible mistakes. I haven't covered all of them. He goes, the whole thing with telling the Pharaoh and later another guy, Abimelech, as if it didn't go bad enough the first time when he told Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister. He does it again a few years later. God didn't say much to Abram about it. He was angry at Pharaoh, and he was like on Abram's side. He was angry at Pharaoh and Abimelech. Isn't that interesting? Even though Abram was messing up. Anyway, he's a mixed bag, man. He has things that are remembered throughout. God's word endures forever. So for the rest of eternity, what Abram did when he believed God, when he left his land, is remembered. But just like us, where things that we've done to believe God and trust that are just where God's up there going, look at her. She has no idea why she's doing this except that I told her to. And she's doing it. Look at him. He doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from, but he still gave that guy some food, right? Like there's that. But just like Abram, we're a mixed bag too, and we have terrible failures where we don't trust. And the theme of Genesis is summed up at the end when Jacob dies and all his brothers, or all Joseph's brothers are thinking, okay, now that our dad's dead, Joseph's finally going to have his revenge on us for all the bad things we did to him. And they make up a story about how Jacob said, hey, be nice to him or whatever. And they tell this lie to Joseph, and Joseph's like, look, don't worry about that. And that's where Genesis 50:20. You planned this evil against me, but God planned it for good in order to do this, to keep many people alive as it is today. And that's the theme of Genesis. That's why I called this sermon, How God is going to Bring the Blessing. The whole theme, we saw it in how he's working through Noah, how he's working through Abram, and if you read it for Isaac, read it for Jacob, and for Joseph, all those stories are about how God is at work in the world for his good purposes, and that he's committed to working with these people that are pretty messed up. They do some great things, but they're also deeply flawed. And in whatever circumstances and messes they create, God just goes with. Like Abraham is making messes with Pharaoh. He's making messes with Abimelech. He's making messes with Hagar, and God just goes with it. And instead of starting to back away, okay, I don't know if I want to be hanging out with this guy. He just comes in closer. He just makes more promises. And he intends on bringing about the beauty and the goodness and the life, right? When he said, be fruitful and multiply, when he blessed them, he wants the life that comes from him to be multiplied out into the world. And he intends to have that happen. That's what the theme of Genesis is about. And that's why it's good to understand that about Genesis to start to understand the rest of it. That God is intent on bringing about goodness and beauty and order in the world through us, through you. No matter your failures, no matter your successes, no matter which ones are higher or lower, that's what he wants to do. So, how you been feeling lately about your successes and failures? Do you think about it? Do you avoid thinking about it? Most of us probably, most of the time, unless we're in kind of a bad mood, we tend to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, and maybe not so much somebody else, but we do more to ourselves. But man, isn't there sometimes when it's just really man, I feel like I just can't do anything right, or I just can't do, this is the 10th millionth time that I'm failing at this. Aren't there times where you have this great success and you're still celebrating it, and 5 minutes later you realize you just really messed up the next thing? It's like whiplash. God's really, really committed to working through you, no matter what. And he's not backing off. He's not backing down. He's doubling down. He's pulling in closer. He's saying, you can't get rid of me that easily. He's saying, I'm able to present you faultless before the throne.